So, hello and welcome back as we journey to the center of the earth with Axel and the professor and our very stalwart guide, and of course, Jules Verne, who thought this all up. You ever wonder, like, I always thought I had a good imagination, but I wonder how much of my imagination was shaped by what I read and how much was just sort of natural imagination. You have to wonder about authors, like where they pull the stuff from. I would be interested in finding out where Jules Verne pulled all of his ideas from, whether he was well traveled. I mean, the descriptions of Iceland could have been firsthand. I mean, maybe Jules Verne actually went there, or maybe just heard a secondhand account of it from somebody that didn't like it a whole lot. Because it definitely does not like place Iceland in a very sympathetic light, at least not back in the 1800s, especially not from the pictures I've seen. It does seem like a very beautiful country. Snowy and stark, but then again, I mean, a lot of places are snowy and stark, I say, as I look out my window at the snowy, stark landscape that is currently out there. Anyway, we're going to read another couple of chapters tonight, and hopefully, we're going to actually see what is in the center of the earth, or at least the beginnings of it, as we jump back into Journey to the Center of the Earth by Verne. Jules Verne. Jules Verne, beginning with chapter 17. The real journey began. So far, our effort had overcome all difficulties. Now, difficulties would really spring up at every step. I had not yet ventured to look down at the bottomless pit into which I was about to plunge. The moment had come. I could still either take my part in the venture or refuse to undertake it, but I was ashamed to withdraw in front of the hunter. Hans accepted the adventure so calmly, with such indifference and such perfect disregard for any danger, that I blushed at the idea of being less brave than he. If I had been alone, I might have once more tried a series of long arguments, but in the presence of Hans, I held my peace. My memories flew back to my pretty Veerland girl, and I approached the central chimney. I've already mentioned that it was 100 feet in diameter and 300 feet in circumference. I bent over a projecting rock and I looked down. My hair stood on end with terror. The feeling of emptiness overcame me. I felt the center of gravity shifting in me and vertigo rising up to my brain like drunkenness. There is nothing more treacherous than our attraction towards the abyss. I was about to fall. A hand pulled me back. Hans's. I suppose I had not taken as many lessons in abysses as I should have at the Kirk in Copenhagen, but however briefly, I had now looked down this well. I had become aware of its structure. Its almost perpendicular walls were bristling with innumerable projections which would facilitate our descent. But if there was no lack of steps, there was definitely no handrail. A rope fastened to the edge of the aperture would have been enough to support us, but how would we unfasten it when we arrived at the bottom? My uncle used a very simple method to overcome this difficulty. He uncoiled a cord as thick as a finger and 400 feet long. The first, he dropped half of it down, and then he passed it around a lava block that was projecting conveniently and threw the other half down the chimney. Each of us could then descend by holding both halves of the rope with his hand, which would not be able to unroll itself from its hold. When we were 200 feet down, it would be easy to retrieve the entire rope by letting one end go and pulling down on the other. Then we would start this exercise all over again, ad infinitum. "Now," said my uncle, after having completed these preparations, "let us see about our loads. I'll divide them into 3 lots. Each of us will strap one on his back. I mean only fragile articles." The audacious professor obviously did not include us in the last category. "Hans," he said, "you will take charge of the tools and a part of the food supplies. You, Axel, will take another third of the food supplies and the weapons. I will take the rest of the food supplies and the delicate instruments." But, but, I said, "the clothes and all the ladders and ropes, who's going to take them down?" "They'll go down by themselves." "How?" I asked. "You'll see." My uncle liked to use extreme means without any hesitation. At his order, Hans put all the unbreakable items into one package, and this packet, firmly tied, was simply tossed into the chasm. I heard the loud roar of the displaced layers of air. My uncle, leaning over the abyss, followed the descent of the luggage with a satisfied look and only stood again when he lost sight of it. "Well," he said, "now it's our turn." I ask any sensible man if it was possible to hear those words and not shudder. The professor tied the package of instruments to his back. Hans took the tools, myself the weapons. The descent started in the following order: Hans, my uncle, and myself. It was carried out in profound silence, broken only by the fall of loose stone into the abyss. I let myself fall, so to speak, frantically clutching the double cord with one hand and buttressing myself from the wall with the other by use of my stick. One single thought obsessed me. I feared that the rock from which I was hanging might give way. This cord seemed very fragile for supporting the weight of 3 people. I used it as little as possible, performing miracles of equilibrium on the lava projections, which my foot tried to seize like a hand. When one of these slippery steps shook under Hans, he said in a quiet voice, "Gib Acht." "Attention," said my uncle. In about a half an hour, we were standing on the surface of a rock wedged in across the chimney from one side to the other. Hans pulled the rope by one of its ends. The other rose in the air. After passing the higher rock, it came down again, bringing with it a rather dangerous shower of bits of stone and lava. Leaning over the edge of our narrow platform, I noticed that the bottom of the hole was still quite invisible. But the same maneuver was repeated with the cord, and half an hour later, we had descended another 200 feet. I don't suppose that even the most obsessed geologist would have studied the nature of the rocks that we were passing under these circumstances. As for me, I hardly troubled myself about them. Pliocene, Miocene, Eocene, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, Carboniferous, Devonian, Silurian, or primitive, it was all the same to me. But the professor, no doubt, was pursuing his observations, or taking notes at least, for during one of our stops he said to me, "The farther I go, the more confident I am. The order of these volcanic formations absolutely confirms Davy's theories. We are now in the midst of primordial soil in which the chemical reaction of Michael's catching flame through the contact of water and air must have occurred. I absolutely reject the theory of heat in the middle of the earth, but we'll see in any case." Always the same conclusion. Of course, I was not inclined to argue. My silence was therefore taken for consent, and the descent continued. After 3 hours, and I still did not see the bottom of the chimney. When I raised my head, I noticed how the opening was getting smaller. Its walls, due to their gentle slope, were drawing closer to each other, and it was beginning to become darker. Still, we kept descending. It seemed to me that the stones breaking loose from the walls fell with a duller echo, and that they must be reaching the bottom of the chasm. As I had taken care to keep an exact account of our maneuvers with the rope, I could tell exactly what depth we had reached and how much time had gone by. We had by then repeated this maneuver 14 times, each one taking half an hour. So it had been 7 hours plus 14 quarters of an hour, or a total of 3 hours that we had rested. So altogether 10 hours and a half. We had started at 1, so it must now be 11. As for the depth we had reached, these 14 rope maneuvers of 200 feet each added up to 2,800 feet. Just then, I heard Hans's voice. "Stop," he said. I stopped short, just as I was about to hit my uncle's head with my feet. "We've arrived," said my uncle. "Where?" I asked, sliding down next to him. "At the bottom of the vertical chimney," he told me. "Is there any way out?" "Yes," he said. "A kind of tunnel that I can see, and which veers off to the right. We'll see about that tomorrow. Let's have dinner first, and afterwards we'll get some sleep." The darkness was not yet complete. We opened the bag with the supplies. We ate, and each of us lay down as well as he could on a bed of stone and lava fragments. When I lay on my back, I opened my eyes and saw a sparkling point of light at the extremity of this 3,000-foot long tube, which had now turned into a vast telescope. It was a star, without any glitter, by which my calculation should be Ursa Minor. And after that, I fell into a deep, deep sleep. And that is the end of chapter 17. And I don't think I would have been able to do that descent. I think I would have been stuck clinging to the edge of the chimney and just told my uncle to go on without me, because looking down, I would have been hit by my personal fear of heights, and that would have been it. So now I'm going to grab a drink, and we'll be right back. All right, let us continue on with chapter 18 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. At 8 in the morning, a ray of daylight came to wake us up. The 1,000 facets of lava on the walls received it on its passage and scattered it like a shower of sparks. There was at least light enough to distinguish surrounding objects. "Well, Axel, what do you say?" said my uncle, rubbing his hands. "Did you ever spend a quieter night in our little house in the Kongstrasse? No noise of carts, no cries of merchants, no boatmen vociferating." "No doubt it is very quiet at the bottom of this well, but there's something alarming about the quietness itself," I said. "Now, come on," said my uncle. "If you are frightened already, what will you be later on? We have not gone a single inch yet into the bowels of the earth." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've only reached the ground level of the island. This long vertical tube, which terminates at the mouth of the crater, has a lower end that should be at about sea level. Are you sure of that? I said. Quite sure. Check the barometer. In fact, the mercury, which had gradually risen in the instrument as we descended, had stopped at 29 inches. You see, said the professor, we only have the pressure of one atmosphere and can't wait for the manometer to take the place of the barometer. And indeed, this instrument would become useless as soon as the weight of the atmosphere exceeded the pressure at sea level. But, I said, isn't there reason to fear the steadily increasing pressure will become very painful? No, said my uncle. We'll descend at a slow pace, and our lungs will become used to breathing a denser atmosphere. Aeronauts lack air as they rise to high elevations, and will perhaps have too much, but I prefer that. Let us not waste a moment. Where's the packet that we sent down before us? I then remembered that we had searched for it in vain in the evening before. My uncle questioned Hans, who, having after looked around attentively with hunter's eyes, said, Der Hoop. Up there. And so it was. The bundle had been caught by a projection 100 feet above us. Immediately, the agile Icelander climbed up like a cat, and in a few minutes the package was in our possession. Now, said my uncle, let's have breakfast, but let's have it like people who may have a long route in front of them. The biscuit and the extract of meat were washed down with a drink of water mixed with a bit of gin. Breakfast finished, my uncle drew from his pocket a small notebook intended for scientific observations. He consulted his instruments and then recorded Monday, July 1st. Chronometer, 8:17 a.m. Barometer, 29 7/12. Thermometer, 6 degrees Celsius. Direction, east-southeast. This last observation applied to the dark tunnel and was indicated by the compass. Now, Axel, said the professor with enthusiasm, we're really going into the bowels of the globe. At this precise moment, our journey begins. That being said, my uncle took the Ruhmkorff device that was hanging from his neck with one hand, and with the other he connected the electric current with the coil in the lantern, and a rather bright light dispersed the darkness of our passage. Hans carried the other device, which was also turned on. This ingenious electrical appliance would enable us to go on for a long time by creating an artificial light even in the midst of the most inflammable of gases. Let's go, said my uncle. Each of us took a package. Hans pushed the load of cords and clothes before, and me, going last, we all entered the tunnel. At the moment of penetrating into this dark tunnel, I raised my head and saw for the last time through the length of that vast tube the skies of Iceland, which I feared I would never behold again. The lava, in its last eruption of 1229, had forced a passage through this tunnel. It still lined the walls with a thick and glistening coat. The electric light was here intensified 100-fold by reflections. The only difficulty in advancing lay in not sliding too fast down an incline of about 45 degrees. Fortunately, certain abrasions and a few blisters here and there formed steps, and we descended, letting our bags slip before us from the end of a long rope. But what made steps under our feet had turned into stalactites up overhead. The lava, porous in some places, had taken the shape of small round blisters, opaque quartz crystals decorated with limpid drops of glass suspended like chandeliers from the vaulted roof and seemed to light up at our passage. It seemed as if the spirits of the abyss were illuminating their palace to receive their earthly guests. It's magnificent, I said spontaneously. My uncle, what a sight! Don't you admire these hues of lava, which blend from reddish brown to bright yellow by graduation? And these crystals that seem to us like globes of light? Ah, you're coming around, are you, Axel? Said my uncle. So you find this splendid, my boy. Well, you'll see many others yet, I hope. Let's go. He should probably have said slide, for we did nothing but drop down steep slopes. It was the facilis descendus Averni of Virgil. The compass, which I consulted frequently, gave our direction as southeast with an inflexible steadiness. This lava stream deviated neither to the left or right. Yet there was no sensible increase in temperature. This justified Davy's theory, and more than once I consulted the thermometer with surprise. 2 hours after our departure, it showed only 10 degrees, another increase of only 4. This was reason to believe that our descent was more horizontal than vertical. As for the exact depth that we had reached, it was very easy to ascertain that. The professor measured the angles of deviation and inclination accurately on the road, but he kept the results to himself. About 8 in the evening, the professor signaled for us to stop. Hans sat down at once, and the lamps were hung on a projection in the lava. We were in a sort of cavern where there was no lack of air. On the contrary, breezes reached us. What caused them? That was a question I did not try to answer at the moment. Hunger and exhaustion made me incapable of reasoning. A descent of 7 consecutive hours is not accomplished without considerable expenditure of strength, and I was exhausted. The word stop therefore brought me great pleasure. Hans spread some provisions out on a block of lava, and we ate with good appetite. But one thing was troubling me. Our supply of water was halfway gone. My uncle was counting on a fresh supply from underground sources, but so far there had been none. I could not help drawing his attention to this issue. "Are you surprised at the lack of springs?" he said. "More than that. I'm anxious about it, Uncle. We have only water enough for 5 days. Don't worry, Axel. I guarantee you that we'll find water, and more than we want." "When?" I asked. "When we have left this layer of lava behind us. How could a spring break through these walls?" "But," I said, "perhaps this passage runs to a very great depth. It seems to me that we have not made much progress vertically." "And why do you suppose that?" "Because if we had advanced far into the crust of the earth, it would be hotter." "According to your theory," my uncle said. "What does the thermometer say?" "Hardly even 15, which means an increase of only 9 degrees since we departed." "So draw your conclusion." "This is my conclusion," I told him. "According to exact observation, the temperature in the interior of the globe increases at a rate of 1 degree Celsius for every 100 feet. But certain local conditions may modify this rate. For example, at Yakutsk in Siberia, it has been observed that an increase of 1 degree takes place every 36 feet. This difference clearly depends on the heat conducting power of the rocks. Moreover, in the neighborhood of an extinct volcano, through Gneiss, it has been observed that an increase of 1 degree is only attained every 125 feet. Let's therefore assume this last hypothesis as the most appropriate ones for our situation and calculate. So, calculate, my boy. Nothing is easier, I told him, putting down figures in my notebook. 9 times 125 adds up to a depth of 1,125 feet. Very accurate. Well, by my observation, we're 10,000 feet below sea level. That's not possible, I said. Yes, or numbers just aren't numbers anymore. The professor's calculations were actually accurate. We had already reached a depth of 6,000 feet beyond that so far reached by the foot of man, such as the mines of Tyrol and those in Bohemia were at. The temperature, which should have been 81 degrees Celsius in this place, was scarcely 15, and this was a serious cause for me to reflect upon. And that is the end of chapter 18. Interesting. I feel like all of that math went over my head, mostly because I am a very ignorant American who does not do the Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion well. And Celsius, I know it's supposed to be the one that makes the most sense, but it just doesn't, probably because I didn't grow up with it. But I'm thinking 15 Celsius is quite comfortable. So we have definitely descended into the realms of science fiction, maybe even a smidge of fantasy, because somehow I don't think that crawling down a volcano is going to leave anybody 15,000 feet below the ground in just one day. At least not on foot. Also, I want the portable electric generator. I wonder if that's an actual thing. I like the idea of it. Anyway, that is it for tonight. Please do leave me a thumbs up if you don't mind. It does always make me smile, and we will keep journeying to the center of the earth tomorrow.